Well, welcome again to Chino y Chicano. And joining us today to talk elections is our good friend, author, and historian Rick Shenkman, who we always go to talk about politics and elections. And Rick, as we record, we're, I guess, just under 2 weeks for the general election. And I don't know what to think about this particular election. It just seems to me it's such a jumble. The only thing I do know is that I don't want to see these television ads anymore because both sides are just freaking driving me crazy with all the BS. How do you see it?
You know, well, even with TiVo, where we flipping through the commercials, it's like a zillion of them.
I
It's
know.
unbelievable.
I
So
know.
a lot of money's being spent on television in this election. There's no question about that. Um, I guess one thing that really stands out to me is that even the pollsters don't know how to predict this election because the turnout is going to be key, and we don't know who's more angry. Are the Democrats more angry or the Republicans? Anger drives turnout, and it's hard to tell. Normally, the party that's out of power is the party that is the most angry, so you can count on them going to the polls, which is why in the last three elections, in the midterms, the out party wound up really walloping the party that was holding the presidency. If you remember back to Bush talking about he had a shellacking in his midterm
Right,
election.
right.
You had Obama talking about how they got their asses whooped. So we have this problem of the out party right now is angry because they're not in. And of course, they've got a lot of issues they can talk about. They can talk about inflation. They can talk about crime. They can talk about border security. And those things seem to resonate with voters right now. The Democrats, on the other hand, well, they're angry because of the Republicans being threatening our democracy, a bunch of election deniers. In fact, according to the New York Times, almost 300 candidates on the Republican side are election deniers, and they could be taking incredibly important posts that could determine the next election in 2024. You've got election deniers who are running for governor in Arizona. You've got election deniers who are running for Secretary of State in a half a dozen key states. So that's making Democrats really upset. And of course, the big issue for the Democrats is abortion. The Supreme Court decision, the Dobbs decision coming down the way it did, that's just made women just furious that they had a right taken away. And we know that human beings feel losses greater than gains. And so here you have a right taken away. That really makes you outraged. So who's going to be more angry and turn out at the polls? Nate Cohen, who's the New York Times pollster, the big pollster, he says this election could either end up in a GOP rout or a GOP landslide. Wow. Then why are we even bothering with the polls if it's that kind of? And he said this just a couple of days ago. I mean, gee whiz, I've never seen a pollster say that kind of thing before. So sit back, watch what happens. We have no idea what's going to happen.
Are there any indicators in the primaries about what might happen? I know, like in let's say Kansas, they beat back an abortion ban. I mean, what are the silver linings? Because generally you're pretty much Doctor Doom on this stuff, and it's just churning my gut listening to this. So, what are the silver linings?
Wow. Well, I could say I almost draw a blank on that, but that's
Oh,
not true. They're
Well, that helps.
my
That helps a lot.
yeah.
my husband calls me DJ. That's for Doomsday Jew, because I
Okay.
always see the worst possible outcomes. I'm very pessimistic in that kind of way. But so here are the possibilities. It's possible that women are the sleeper vote, and even Republican women don't want to admit to their husbands that they're going to go into the voting booth and they're going to pull the lever for the Democrats because they're upset secretly about abortion going away. So that's a real possibility. I could see that happening. Another possibility is that you've got young people who turned out at about 51%, I think, in the last election, and everybody's kind of expecting them not to turn out. Maybe they turn out in a big way. And we know that young people are heavy Democrats. Maybe Hispanics who have been sliding a little bit towards the Republicans. Maybe that was just when Trump was on the ballot, and for some reason they kind of liked his messaging. Maybe they'll come back to the Democrats. I don't think that we should be all that shocked that the polls seem to tighten up in the Republicans' favor, because that's basically just the old social science lesson of regression to the mean. The Republicans these are Republicans who were disaffected by the January 6th insurrection. They don't like Donald Trump all that much, but that R really means something next to candidates' names. So they're kind of coming home in the final weeks. That often happens in elections. So we shouldn't be too shocked by that. So, okay, that's about the best spin I could put on it.
So let's talk about the state of the democracy in all of this. I personally feel that we're like on the brink, and that we've been teetering here for, well, for a long time. But to me, this election in a way is a bit of a sleeper, because I think that that's the big concern for me anyway. Here we still have the January 6th committee investigating things. We continue to hear, from Trump and deniers and such. I just feel like this election is really the whole thing about it. The state of our democracy is on the ballot more than anything else. What do you think?
Well, I think that there's two different elections being held. There's the Republican election, which is, it's all about inflation and crime and the border. And then there's the Democratic election, which is the Democrats talking all about the state of our democracy. Each of these could be two wave elections, but they're happening simultaneously. That's why this is so hard to predict, because these are two huge themes. I mean, normally, right, in an out year like this, the president's party would suffer substantial losses. And so that makes you think it's for the Republicans. And then for the Democrats, you'd think, well, January 6th, the insurrection, that's not that long ago. That's still uppermost in our minds. We just had these hearings that were devastating to the Republicans. And you'd think from the January 6th committee, and you'd think, well, that's going to be what really determines things. So it's two big cosmic issues, and they're both kind of fighting each other for which is going to be the more important in the election. Now, as far as I'm concerned, look, the only thing that matters right now is this being a democracy. Tom Nichols, who's a longtime Republican conservative who taught military history, he now is a columnist at The Atlantic, and he is saying the only thing that matters right now is our democracy. And whether it costs, an extra 25 cents to buy a hamburger at McDonald's, that is inconsequential compared with the potential loss of our democracy. Yeah. And it's real. Somebody the other day, a pundit, who was it now? Was it David Brooks?
Right.
No, it wasn't David Brooks. One of the pundits that I read was arguing that the Democrats made a serious mistake. Oh, maybe it was Brett Stevens, made a serious mistake in not making this election all about democracy. And that if they had really fought hard on the democracy front, that would have been really the way, maybe it was Tom Nichols, really the way to make it clear to the public. Because while Biden talks about democracy being on the ballot, and a lot of Democrats have talked about it, they haven't made it very concrete. So let me make it very concrete. Election deniers could be in place in Arizona, for example, where in 2020, the governor, Doug Ducey, though he was a Republican, he certified the vote for Joe Biden. If the Republican Carrie Lake, who is now running and has a good chance of winning, if she's in office in 2024, she may well not certify a Joe Biden or Democrat win in that state. That one state could determine the election. So that's how important this is. And imagine what will happen if America wakes up after the election in 2024 and Arizona is out and its electoral votes for Joe Biden aren't counted, and instead Donald Trump is elected president again because of that. There is going to be violence on the streets. I mean, there's no way, because that's undemocratic. So you're going to have Democrats by the tens of millions going out in the streets. You remember the Women's March after Donald Trump? This would make that look like nothing. And I think that enough Democrats would be upset that the norms are being violated and the expectations of our democracy have been violated in such a profound way that they want to turn violent. We're all worried about the Republicans getting violent, but it's possible if your democracy is on the line and you feel like legitimately the election is stolen. I mean, as opposed to the Republicans, who were all claiming, of course, that the last election was stolen with no basis for it. I mean, I'd be mad too if I was a Republican. I thought the election was stolen, but the election wasn't stolen. And that's the big difference here.
Right.
Wow. I mean, but these messages of saving democracy and all this other stuff, it really depends on who your constituents are and what's important to them. I mean, like if you were to say saving our democracy, some people don't even understand that concept, but they do understand gas prices. So it really depends on who you're talking to, right? I mean, which group? Because you had said that, you know, where the battleground states are is really important. And what's important to them? Democracy or checkbook issues? And
talk about the people there that could turn those elections in those battleground areas, because there is an issue as to who they are and also their background as far as educationally and where they come from.
Well, let's talk about the battleground states, which the media are always talking about.
Yeah.
Why are these the battleground states? They're the battleground states for one primary reason. And I have to admit that this wasn't clear to me until I saw some survey research a few weeks ago put out by Echelon. And now it all of a sudden really crystallized for me. Why are the battleground states battleground states? It's not because they're evenly divided between the Republicans and the Democrats. No, they are battleground states because that's where a majority or a near majority is formed by people, whites, non-white, non-college voters. In the rest of the country, white non-college voters form about 41% of the electorate. In the battleground states, they're in the majority or the near majority. They're either 49% or they're as high as 56%. Wow. So now for these folks who did not go to college, what do they care about most? They probably do care about the price of milk the most.
Right.
You do have to be educated. I don't want to come off as an elitist here, but you do have to be educated to think in terms of elections, in terms of democracy and these abstractions. Otherwise, we, as human beings, we naturally always respond to the concrete. That's how we evolved, to respond to the concrete. But here you have to respond to something that's somewhat abstract. Well, if you go to college and you're exposed to a lot of different courses in political science or in history, that is a much more natural concept for you to kind of think about and maybe be worried about. If you only have a high school education, it's probably not something that you ever encountered in school, or maybe you did in some class, in social studies, but that was back in the 10th grade or the 11th grade. It was decades ago for a lot of these folks, and it's just not of much moment to them. Plus, we know that people who have gone to college tend to pay much more attention to politics. So they're following the debates more. The white non-college voters tend not to pay much attention to politics. So they're voting on just kind of what they feel. Well, if you are an American consumer going to the grocery store and gassing up your car, you're feeling pretty miserable right now about the economy, even though the unemployment rate is quite low.
Yeah.
And we do know that, most voters remain fairly ignorant about what's going on in the country. A majority don't know we have three branches of government. I mean, it's a majority didn't understand that Barack Obama lowered the taxes for 95% of Americans. They thought Obama raised taxes because they had a stereotype in their heads that Democrats raise taxes and Republicans cut taxes. So we're dealing with that as well. It's a perfect storm of ignorance and threat that is combining.
What is the gender breakdown?
Most of the non-college white voters are going to perforce be male, because we know that females are disproportionately represented in college now. There are many more females. They're more like 56% of the college student population is made up now of women as opposed to men. So you can draw some conclusions from that, but I haven't seen any survey research.
Yeah, because it would be interesting because of the other issues on the ballots, that might be sort of a wild card in this group to chip away a little bit that.
Yeah, but if you look at the messaging, particularly again, if you look at the commercials that we see, particularly from on the GOP side, there isn't a lot of depth into what they say. A lot of it is really aimed at, stoking that internal emotion about, gas prices or crime and these types of things. So you got to know that that's really aimed at men, because men don't think beyond that. It's that initial reaction to things. It's true. It's like, because there's still that immaturity level. Hell, they could be 60 years old and still not get it. But, so I think that that's really the folks they're going to, and it might make the biggest difference in a midterm than it would in a general.
So, Rick, what about our local elections here, right? King County and the state. I mean, we've got Patty Murray running. That's really the main one for us here in King County and Seattle. What is the state of that?
That is the main one. So in the last poll, which was from like a week ago or so, Patty Murray is up by 8 points. And people are really alarmed because the Democrats haven't had that narrow a margin of victory in decades. So that's alarming. In the rest of the country, the Democrat being ahead of the Republican by 8 points would be, woohoo, break out the champagne, let's cheer.
That's true.
But in this state, it's absolutely alarming. I fully expect Patty Murray is going to win. I see no sign that Tiffany Smiley, for all of her kind of pleasant blonde appeal, she's youthful and she's articulate, that she is sweeping the state. So I think that people will still stick with Patty Murray. She still is the senator in tennis shoes, even 40 years later. We've just got that in our heads for those of us who've lived here a long time. I'm not too worried about her. But when you step back and look at the whole country, if the Republicans do have excuse me, a wave election, it's possible that she could get swept out in some weird way. But I'm not expecting it. So
because there's a strong base for her in King County, the most populous county, and Western Washington tends to vote Democratic for the most part. So that I don't know that Smiley can make up that difference in Eastern Washington.
Well, and Smiley just doesn't have a reputation. I mean,
right.
Who was Tiffany Smiley before she ran for this office?
Exactly.
You know, yesterday in preparation for this interview, I went into Wikipedia to just find out who is this person. She doesn't even have a page on Wikipedia, and she's running for the United States Senate. So she's really coming from out of nowhere. She talked during the debate about her accomplishments, and she took on the government, she took on the VA, but these were fairly small bore fights, probably mostly involving her husband, who was an Iraqi war veteran who was blinded when there was a bomb attack on his unit. But she's not got some independent following because she did some amazing thing. She's not a celebrity candidate like Dr. Oz. So I'm just not too worried about her. I am worried that she's another election denier until a relatively short time ago on her website. And Patty Murray made an issue of this during the debate. I thought effectively, she had been an election denier, raised questions about the legitimacy of the Biden presidency. And then once she won the primary, she scrubbed her website and got rid of that. So now she's pretending that she's much more mainstream. Well, she's an election denier. And she played footsie with the Trumps. She's like one of these mini Trumps who have popped up all around the country, little mini Trumps, like J.D. Vance, who was a Trump hater just a couple of years ago, and now he's turned into a mini Trump. He's just echoing everything, as Trump himself said. He's kissing my ass,
which is disgusting imaging. Thank you, Professor Shenkman, for sharing that view with us.
Can I throw in one thing? These are some poll numbers that came out recently that basically show if you are worried about abortion, well, Patty Murray has got the advantage over Tiffany Smiley, 58%. If you are worried about climate change, she's got 53 points above Tiffany Smiley. Now, if you're concerned about the border, and it's not the Canadian-American border we're talking about here, it's the Mexican border, 1,000 miles down south. Well, Smiley is your candidate. She's got 75%, 75 points beyond Patty Murray. If crime is your issue, Smiley's 45 votes ahead, 45 points ahead. If inflation, Smiley is 28 points ahead. But here's the most important statistic. Murray is 32 points ahead among urban voters, and that's the biggest population. She's 49 points ahead with suburban voters.
Wow.
Smiley only has one demographic that she's got the advantage, and that's rural voters, and she's 16 points ahead.
Yeah.
So I just don't see from these numbers that Patty Murray's in trouble. Okay, I just wanted to work in those numbers.
That's good. Let's talk about some of the House races in this state. In Central Washington, you have Dan Newhouse, who, didn't go along with the Republican plan in the whole issue of Trump and the impeachment.
Got to impeach Trump.
Right, he did. And getting huge blowback in Central Washington. But he's still an R. So at this point, do you expect that he'll still win?
Yeah, his big fight was really winning the primary. Once he won the primary, then I think he's probably a shoo-in for election because it's it's a Republican leaning district.
Yeah.
And it's really remarkable. I mean, he's of the 10 Republicans who voted for impeachment, he's about the only real survivor.
Yeah.
Which is stunning.
It's very stunning.
Absolutely.
Very stunning. Yeah. Yeah.
Right here in our state.
Yeah. Also, Kim Schreier, she's up against Matt Larkin in the 8th Congressional District. There's talk about the ads that we're seeing nonstop and ad nauseum.
Yeah.
Is he a challenge to her, a strong challenge to her?
Well, I suppose he's a strong challenge to her because it's a purple district. It can go either way. She grabbed the district 2 terms ago, and that was a shock.
Yeah,
it was like, wow, she's flipped the Republican district to the Democrats.
And she ran against some credible people.
Yeah. But he is so extreme. I mean, he is an out-and-out election denier. He's an out-and-out against abortion, even in the case of rape and incest. He's very extreme, and I just hope and pray that he doesn't win, because I don't want to see somebody who's that extreme in Congress.
Yeah, that could be a pretty close race there. It's hard to tell right now.
I mean, it always is, right? I mean, that's always a battle.
Yeah, it has been. The 8th has always been an interesting. Well, Susan Delbene ran there several times and wasn't able to win until they created another district for her to go into. From the whole economic standpoint, Rick, obviously everybody's concerned about inflation, gas prices, food prices. What impact do you think that in the end is that going to be the real deciding factor as to whether Democrats are going to be able to keep the House?
Well, almost always the economy is the key issue. You remember back in when Bill Clinton was running, it's the economy stupid from James Carville. It's a great line and a great observation. Everybody keeps quoting it because it's so true. People, as human beings, respond viscerally to how they're feeling. And economics drives a lot of how they're feeling about the society. When people are driving down Joe Biden's numbers, what they're really saying is they're upset about the economy. Whether or not the president of the United States can have an impact on gas prices, for example, he can't. He can have just an impact on the margins. The Republicans want to say that because Joe Biden limited drilling on federal lands when he came into office, that's why gas prices are so high. Well, no, that's not why gas prices are so high. They're so high because Vladimir Putin decided to invade Ukraine, basically cut Europe off and stop selling his gas. That pulled a lot of gas off the market. And then OPEC came along, and they're not our pals, and they decided to cut the number of gallons that they're putting out every day. And it's a worldwide phenomenon. Inflation is a worldwide phenomenon. But people are intuitive, and they're not analytical when it comes to these issues. So they're not stepping back and studying. I always say, if you have to explain an issue in American politics, you've already lost. So the Democrats are in the position of having to explain that, it's not just here in the United States, it's everywhere in the world that there's this rampaging inflation. Now, I have read economists who say there is a difference between our inflation and what's going on in the rest of the world. Ours is a demand inflation, meaning consumers had a lot of money in their pockets, so they kept buying stuff, and that meant there was high demand. And in the rest of the world, it's mostly a supply issue where they can't get enough gas, and that's got ripple effects throughout the economy. But still, it's inflation, and that's a difficult issue for voters to kind of sit back and remain objective about it and say, okay, here's the whole debate about it, blah, blah, blah. No, they're going to feel it viscerally. So I do think economics is important. Now, if it was just economics, the Republicans wouldn't have the chance. They've got so many other factors in their favor. It's an off-year election. They're the out party. the out party almost always has more of a reason to show up at the polls. So a little bit of what we were talking about earlier, it's who's more angry. Is it the Republicans who are angry for being out of power? Or is it the Democrats who are more angry about the Dobbs decision in the Supreme Court on abortion? And so whose anger is going to show? So there's that. And, you know, the Republicans are masters at exploiting people's anger. And they've drummed up all these culture war issues to try to get their base angry and to get other Americans angry. And if you go on the Nextdoor app here, you see that even on Queen Anne, where I live, people are really angry about crime. So that's almost become like a culture war issue. And of course, you know, all these issues are playing to the Republicans' advantage. It's kind of a natural advantage that they have in this election. I will say that there's one advantage the Democrats have. The Democrats, when Joe Biden came into power, did not sweep in huge majorities in either the House or the Senate. So that means there aren't a lot of squishy, soft people who were sitting in the Congress, particularly in the House of Representatives, because they were swept in on Joe Biden's coattails. He didn't have any coattails. He barely squeezed by with, you know, a majority in the House of Representatives. And if, you know, 5 votes goes the other way, the Republicans get it. So that's kind of a Democratic advantage, that there's not a lot of these squishy, soft Democrats who are up for election. It's mostly people who've been around for a while, although you had a lot of Democratic retirements. One issue that I want to make sure we touch on before we go is the whole issue of what's going to happen if the Republicans do take the House of Representatives. That's the likeliest scenario. What's going to happen? The big issue that everybody should be talking about, and I wish the Democrats were really hammering this home in ads, because this is what's going to happen. The Republicans leaders coming in have said that they are going to make the vote on the debt ceiling, raising the debt ceiling, key to everything. So basically, they are saying they are going to risk the United States going into default for the first time in its history unless they get their way on massive cuts in Social Security and Medicare, and generally these programs that are called the entitlement programs. Now, they didn't care during the Trump years when Trump was running up literally multi-trillion dollar debts. They didn't touch those programs, but they want to touch them now because it's to their advantage and to the Democrats' disadvantage. Now, we had this fight once before. We had this fight with Boehner, and Boehner, when he was Speaker of the House and they had a Republican majority, went head to head with Bill Clinton on this, and Clinton cleaned their clock. So it's possible that the Democrats once again could win on this. But if we do go into a default, if that's where this majority puts us, and they could well put us there, that's going to cost this country its credit rating. The dollar, which has been strong for decades, could plummet. It could give the Chinese yuan, or Russia and China could get together on some new currency. And I saw that there's some talk about them creating a new currency that will try to be the competitor to the dollar. This could upend the globe and global politics. This is a huge issue. The Democrats do have a solution. In December, they could come back to power, and they could, while they're still in control of both the House and the Senate and the presidency, they could pass a law that says, forget the debt ceiling. There's no point to it. And there really is no point to it. Basically, the Congress has already approved these appropriations, and all the debt ceiling says is we're going to go in debt to pay for these programs. Almost no other country in the world has such a law on its books. It came about during World War I, fitted to those circumstances, and up until recently, until the 1990s, both parties just routinely passed the law raising the debt ceiling. But then Gingrich so radicalized the Republican Party, and the Tea Party later was radicalized, and they're all claiming that, they're going to fight about this. And I should give credit to Obama too. When he went up against Boehner, it was Clinton and Gingrich went up against each other. Right. I think I said Boehner before. Yeah. Clinton and Gingrich went up, and Clinton cleaned his clock. And then again, it was Boehner and the Tea Party against Obama, and Obama cleaned their clock. So it's not been a winning issue for the Republicans, but they keep planning on using it. And the guy who's coming in as head of the budget committee on the Republican side, if the Republicans win, he has said he's going to use this to as leverage. Well, this will be huge. This will be what we're all talking about. And the Democrats need to basically run around like Paul Revere and warn people about this.
And again, that's where, most voters don't know anything about this, and are not, again, they're just focused right now on those basic issues of inflation and economy and gas prices and things like that. And then the other part of this is that what happens to the January 6th committee if the Republicans win, because they've made it clear that basically they're just going to come back and start investigations against Biden, and Trump gets off.
Marjorie Taylor Greene is already with, an impeachment resolution against Joe Biden. I don't know what he's going to be impeached for, but she wants him impeached. And the Republicans probably, if they come into power in the House, they have the right to impeach the president. I'm guessing they'll drum up some issue and they'll wind up impeaching him. Yeah. And what a distraction for this country. I mean, Joe Biden is a centrist. He's not done anything that warrants impeachment. I suppose the most radical thing he's done is his student loan program, and the courts so far are holding him up on that. So he may not even be able to put that through. We'll see. But there's no grounds for impeaching the guy. And yet this radical Republican Congress probably will try and could very well succeed.
So the January impeachment's going to be another debt ceiling fight, just kind of this thing that they're going to do.
Yeah, but it doesn't have the consequences. It'll be kind of a circus, but won't have consequences. This debt ceiling fight is the most serious fight that we will face in the new year, unless the Democrats get their act together. And I don't know if Joe Manchin and Sinema will come around and vote with the Democratic majority. I know that Joe Biden has kind of waffled on this. He has said he wants to address this issue, but he's not willing to get rid of the debt ceiling entirely. Well, that's dispiriting to the Democrats. I mean, there is no sound economic reason for having this debt ceiling law on the books at all. But I guess he's taking a centrist position to kind of reassure people.
Yeah, but maybe to enter into that argument detracts from some real issues that are in front of voters this time. Yeah. So it's Rick, all about politics.
Yeah, Rick. Before we go, give us your prediction.
Oh. Well, and here's where, of course, I always identify myself as a historian. And I say that, historians can't even agree about the past, let alone predict the future. And God, or whoever you believe in, did not give man the talent of clairvoyance.
Come on. Don't give me that filibuster stuff. Come on.
Well, look, Joe Biden's still going to be president, no matter who wins. The presidency retains a lot of power. And my guess is, the Senate's going to remain in Democratic hands, and the House will probably go Republican. We could have some wild surprises. Patty Murray could conceivably lose. Chuck Grassley in Iowa, who's been in basically, since George Washington was president. The guy would be in his 90s. He'd be, rivaling Strom Thurmond for length of stay in the Senate. the polls are showing it's kind of neck and neck, and a Democrat could beat him this time. Well, that would be huge. So I'm kind of looking forward to this. I want to see Patty Murray reelected. I want to see Chuck Grassley go down to defeat. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Rick Shenkman. So we'll come back.
Always
after
a
the
ray of
election.
sunshine for us.
Yes. Thank you, Rick. Sunshine Shenkman. All right. Well, after the election,
All right.
we'll come back before the end of the year and kind of regroup and see where we're at. Rick, thank you so much. And I know you had
thank
a
you.
bike injury and a bike crash, and you're recovering. So have a speedy recovery.
All right, I will. Thank you so much. Appreciate
Okay.
it.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Rick.
Okay.